Best laid plans in a trash compactor. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor. Can't get herpes from a tractor. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor. In the way of what you're after. Nuisance factor, nuisance factor, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, hello everybody.
Hello, Boris.
Hello, Adam. Who's this young man?
We want to welcome today to the Nuisance Factor podcast a newcomer to the podcast, an old friend of ours, Mr. Conrad Boylan? Okay.
All right.
I'm always unsure how to pronounce his last name. I'm sorry. I've known him for like 7 years, at least.
ABC going on. Adam, Boris, Conrad.
Nice.
I like it.
Wow.
Conrad, since, we've kind of introduced ourselves to the audience here many, many times before, do you want to say a little bit about who you are, where you hail from, and such?
All right. So I'm from New Jersey originally. I've been living in Jacksonville for 7 years. I met Boris in a networking group 7 years ago. I was a history teacher, and now I sell commercial real estate.
Very nice. Very nice. So we've spoken with Conrad about all kinds of topics over these years.
Many, many times.
So today we were thinking about what should we talk about, and there's many, many different things we could talk about, but one thing that is kind of on everybody's mind is what's happening in Israel and Gaza and with that whole situation.
For sure.
And so since we're typically preoccupied about morality and ethics and things of that nature, it seemed prudent to maybe bring that up again. Adam and I had previously spoken about this in the context of what Aaron Bushnell did. And I've had a lot to think about since then, a lot of ruminating on my own views that I expressed during that time. And hopefully we'll be able to elucidate the subject a little bit further today through this discussion. So let me open up the floor first to maybe Conrad. And, Conrad, can I just ask, do you think that what Israel is doing in Gaza is ethical?
So I guess my first question would be the definition of ethical. But I guess more importantly, I want to just establish that I am a gambler, and I would fully bet on Israel winning this. So regardless of who's right, who is wrong, if I had to bet, I would bet on Israel winning this. And I'm just saying that's, history tends to look favorably upon winners, right?
Correct.
So I'm just want to put that out there first.
Nobody asked the victor if he was right.
Right.
In the context of war.
Yeah, exactly right. He's always correct.
Yeah.
So, that being said, in the history books in the future, right, are the ethics of what Israel's doing the same as the ethics of what they're doing in the present day? That's a good question. I guess the way I'm looking at it, if I have to be very objective about it, right, they're probably not going to ever get along. The Israelis and the Palestinians. I feel like this is very clear at this point. I feel like most people would say, hey, that's not a solution. Them getting along is not a solution. All right, that being the case, that leaves one of two solutions. Solution number one, forcible migration, Trail of Tears, right? It's nice to live in Florida without the natives here, right? It's much nicer, right? If they were here saying, give us our stuff back, Florida would kind of suck. Right, I'm sure we could all agree on that.
No, I don't think we can all agree on that.
Really? You don't think it would suck? You don't think it would suck if the natives were here saying, hey, give us our stuff back. Give us our stuff back. Isn't it? Where
are we going to go?
Right. Yeah, exactly right.
Like Mexico? I don't think they want us either.
Right. So,
No, I don't necessarily think that that we would want to give our, the land back or whatever. But that's not the issue. The issue is, are we better off because those people were removed at one point in our history? And you seem to be saying that yes, objectively we are.
I think Jacksonville is a much better city, right? With the unquestionable who owns this land.
Yeah,
right. Once the answer to the question is answered, who owns this land, for sure, without a doubt, things become a lot easier.
Sure.
Right. So the basic premise going on in Israel right now is who owns this land. Right. And there's one of two ways to secure that it's Israel's. One is you kill every last man, woman, and child. That's Palestinian. Solution number two, you forcibly make them emigrate somewhere. Right. A forcible removal. Because we've already established that them getting along, short of maybe Jesus himself coming back, right? Short of that happening, they're probably never get along.
You don't think a two-state solution with a real sovereignty and a real army and a real government over the Palestinians, of the Palestinians, by the Palestinians, for the Palestinians can't exist alongside an Israeli government? I don't understand why a two-state solution is just absolutely impossible.
Yeah, I have to agree with Adam. I think you're assuming that they're not going to be ever able to get along, even though we can see why they don't get along.
So
they don't get along because there's just a lack of compromise on both sides, and it's obvious.
So after 80 years of a failed two-state solution, now we're thinking we're going to turn the corner?
The two-state solution has never really been tried. There's never been a Palestinian state that wasn't subservient and vassalized towards the Israeli state since
because Israel's going to win this.
Well, because Israel has all the money.
Israel's going to win this.
Right. Well, okay, but
what I'm saying is that it's never been tried, a true two-state solution where there's two truly sovereign government. What you've had is the Israeli government sovereign, and you've had this Palestinian authority that's quasi-sovereign but absolutely subservient and under the thumb both financially, politically, economically, and even in the sense of, the Israeli, the IDF and the Mossad and everybody else dominating them militarily as well. We've never had a situation, and I don't know that we can even gerrymander or somehow create a situation where there's two side-by-side equally sovereign states, but I just don't see why we give up on that and say it's got to be either, Trail of Tears or genocide. I think that's defeatist, and I think that really ignores the human factor in all of it.
Okay, so if we talk about that human factor, then let's say you're on the side that's going to win this thing. Mm-hmm. Let's not even call it the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's say any conflict. Mm-hmm. You're on the side that is definitely going to win. The momentum's on your side. Time is on your side. What incentive is there for you to possibly give up ground?
Because
your charity, your kindness, your sympathy,
your long-sightedness, in my opinion.
I agree with Boris. I mean, in the long run, do you want to be, the great, just state of Israel that exists for the Jewish people as a traditional state, or do you want to be looked at something not necessarily all that different from, say, Pol Pot or the Turks who committed genocide?
The Americans who stole the land from
the Americans who stole the land from the Indians. I mean, do you want to be seen as that or not? I don't know. I mean, is that in your best interest or not? I guess it depends on, your, like Boris said, it depends on how far you're looking ahead, I think.
And with respect to the Trail of Tears, I've made this argument before, but the impact of that, the negative impact of that on the fabric of our society today, the tensions that exist, think about what you just said about Israel and Palestine. Those folks are never going to get along. Well, assuming that, why couldn't you say the same thing about blacks and whites in America, right? Former slaves are never going to get along with their former masters.
I think it's a property rights thing. It's a concern over who owns property. So when you talk about racial tensions in the United States, I think that's in a different category. I think the idea of, hey, this was my land, this was ancestrally my land, this was my father's land, my father's father's land, right? This has a very human impact on people. People feel a certain obligation to defend that land, reclaim that land, say, hey, that land belonged to my father's 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 father. So that being said, I think everybody would understand the Palestinians' claim to these lands, just as everybody would understand the Indians' claim to Florida, the natives' claim to America, right? That being said, right, if you're on the winning side of something, right, like the Americans knowing they're going to defeat the Indians, why? What incentive is there? I mean, the only incentive to be super kind to them is the kindness of your heart, which is, I mean, maybe have a bad view of humanity, but like that doesn't seem to be the plurality in human hearts. It seems to be to me that most human hearts are very selfish. They very much want things, and if you're telling them, hey, you're on the winning team, right? The only way you would lose is if you got to yourself, is if you're like, oh man, if you second guessed yourself. So that being said, right? The Palestinians are going to lose this.
If you sell your soul for a victory, what do you win exactly?
Yeah.
I mean, if you soul is a bad word for non-Christians, but if you sell your humanity for victory, what have you really won?
I mean,
what does a man gain?
Yeah, I mean, I think people get over things. How often do you think about the Sioux or the Cherokee? Right? How often do you think about?
I mean,
how often do you think about
the Sioux and the Cherokee also aren't like blowing up hospitals and and consulates in my town either.
Once upon a time, they were attacking farms and ranches all the time. Once upon a time, they were a definite threat to definite Americans. Once upon a time, they were. So in the future, I don't know, when the Palestinians aren't there anymore, when they're not attacking anything, it's. I'm just saying, on a long view of history, it is very difficult to see that someone's some country who's destined to win something, who favorably is going to win something, it is very, very difficult to see why they would turn course, why would they would allow for this two-state solution when they don't need to. Can
I give you an anecdote? I went to law school with a guy who was who had formerly worked in the diplomatic corps, and he had been in, I believe he was in South Africa most of his career as a sort of junior diplomat. Not like an ambassador, but just a worker bee in the corps. And he was telling me a story one time about the ambassador to Israel having a conversation with some American delegation that they were involved with, and the conversation went something like. The American ambassador made some kind of comment about the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the Israeli ambassador came back with, well, America had the good fortune to eliminate its native population at a time when it was still fashionable to do so.
Right, and at a time without,
the problem with conquest is it's simply out of fashion internationally at this point. It's been theoretically by the Nuremberg Tribunal and the UN Charter, of course, outlawed. Theoretically, I mean, Boris knows my feelings about international law and especially international human rights. So it's not like I have a nuanced view about this, okay? But I am, in fact, in the minority in the opinions I hold about this. The vast majority of people in the world believe that international law is real and believe that it should be and can be enforced. And, naked conquest is no longer fashionable, no longer legal internationally, allegedly.
Right, but it would never cease. We could all agree, all the laws in the world, we all understand the human heart, and conquering other people is never going to go away. I hope all three of us are on that same page. There's nothing in the history books that seem to indicate that it would ever change.
The will to power cannot be regulated by statute. That much I will say.
Is it possible, though, that the reason that conquest went out of fashion is because it was determined to be undesirable, precisely because of its long-term side effects? I mean, look at the Japanese, for example. The Japanese were, during World War II, behaved brutally, horribly. Yeah. It was essentially an entire nation of people devoted to death, to dying well. And, looking at the history of Japan, well, before that, they were brutalized by the Mongolians, who went coast to coast and raped and murdered and crucified villagers wholesale. Any village that didn't give in, they would make an example of it. So they learned, they learned the brutality, they recycled it. And what is Japan now, right? I mean, if we're talking about greatness,
vassal.
Exactly, it's a vassal.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that is.
So I think that what Andrew Jackson did with the Cherokee, right? The Trail of Tears. Again, short-term gain, maybe even
long-term gain. We are the direct beneficiaries of that. The three of us, the entire state, the entire city that's named after Andrew Jackson. We are the direct beneficiaries of that.
When America is at some point in the future at its lowest point of social cohesion, can you see how this is a powder keg ready to explode? Native American white relations, black-white relations, these are things that are going to contribute to potentially the demise of America in the future. You do not see the possible adverse impacts of what Andrew Jackson did beyond the short-term gain of protecting the settlers at the expense of the Indians at that time.
Well, I'm not really sure. I mean, because you could look at the problems in a couple different ways. One that I think is a major problem is who controls gambling in our entire state.
The Indian tribes, right. The Seminole Indian tribes,
the third biggest state in the wealthiest country in the planet, and it's controlled entirely by this minority that wasn't even a real tribe, right? That wasn't even a real tribe, right? Nobody was calling themselves the Seminoles when the Europeans got here.
What is the relevance of these details? You seem to understand where he's coming from, but what is the relevance?
I understand that the Seminole Indian tribe is actually a conglomeration of many native tribes in Florida that sort of banded together to form a political faction and to increase their power by coming together, which was essentially forced upon them by the fact that they had so little political power in the face of such an enormous wave of Anglo-Saxon power that was just coming in to crush them. But yes, there's no question that giving the Indians the old mob racket of controlling gambling was, that's a pretty big matzo ball, man.
So it's a pacification. It's an act of pacification.
It's a major reparations.
But exactly. So it seems like even our leaders, right, recognize the detrimental effects of the Trail of Tears, such that they feel the need to pacify this previously powerless population.
Palestinian casinos one day.
Because the impact on this, again, on the social fabric, like you can't place a value on that, and we see what happens. We see what happens within countries where they come unglued like that. They come undone at the seams.
I guess what I was saying is you had mentioned racial tensions and things in the U.S. I want to simplify the problem. All I'm saying is a property rights issue. There is something that goes on when someone says, hey, this is my land. That will make you go and fight for that land. We are so far removed from that now that these descendants living in Oklahoma, whose forefathers really probably did own this land at one point, it is so far removed that their challenge to it, their defiance, their ability to want to go after it is so far diminished that it's very, very clear this belongs to America, right? We distributed the land, we gave all the property out to everybody, and now there's no two ways about it. Similarly, in Palestine, right, these are people whose fathers' lands were taken. Their grandfathers' lands were taken. It's not like the natives now whose great-great-grandparents' stuff was taken. We're talking like very, very so these people have a very, very good claim to this land, a claim that most people would die for, that they're like, hey, I'm going to do this. That being said, I mean, if you're Israel and you know Palestine has that claim and has that right, I mean, why would you help them? What charity would you possibly give to them? Right? Like I said, so much time has to...
All you have to do is not kill them.
Yeah, can you quantify, though, the impact this is going to have? What is this doing? Like, I'm a kind of person who was raised to believe that the Jews are exceptional, that they're wonderful people. They're very intelligent. They're capable. The state of Israel has a legitimate reason for existence. And even though I'm not a religious person myself, you know, the Bible was still very instrumental in my upbringing. So for me, the Jewish people as the chosen people of God resonates also. But this situation in Gaza, it's doing nothing to bolster the image of the Israelis in my mind. If anything, it's making me doubt everything I've felt about certainly the state of Israel, you know. So how is that beneficial to them overall? They still have to have support in the world. Even if they push the Palestinians out, they still have to retain control over that region surrounded by, 22 Arabic countries? Is that the count?
A lot.
Right, but I mean, how many of those Arabic countries are they now friendly with, or a lot friendlier than they were in the past? I mean, things change. We can all agree on that, right?
They were making great progress until the whole Gaza thing.
Right, and this is why I was saying before, I firmly believe this is going to get overshadowed by some greater war. And that will definitely give the Israelis the chance to truly, I mean, push the people out, right? So that it becomes like a footnote, a mere ancillary, just, oh man, that was going on at the same time as this greater war was happening.
Well, that's okay. So, but let's get back to this notion that, you know, sometimes genociding a population is beneficial. And you can objectively say that, say, what Andrew Jackson did was beneficial. The other choice is you don't genocide them; you forcibly remove them, like Andrew Jackson did. Alternatively, the Germans who weren't going to get along with the Polish, what did Stalin do? Did he kill 4 million of them? I think the reason...
No, he forcibly removed them and put them into right. And now there's no problems. Now no one says, is this Polish or German territory? We all know what's what. But right, the property rights become very secure at that point.
Well, look, property rights, at least in the Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence, okay. The stealing property is part of property rights. It's called adverse possession. Do you realize that there's a concept? There's a concept in property where once I take it from you and I hold it for a certain amount of time, regardless of whether it was okay or not for me to do it, it's mine. Once I've had it from it,
like the Golan Heights.
Well, no, it's called adverse possession. If you got a piece of land and I occupy it and I fence it and I hold it and I pay the taxes on it and I develop it for a certain amount of time in English jurisprudence, it becomes mine by virtue of adverse possession.
The Golan Heights belongs to Israel. It belongs to Israel.
Well, it depends. Possession. Really, you know, there's no international law like that. But you're bringing up the subject of property rights, and my point is that stealing land is part of the whole the mechanism of property law.
I agree, and Israel would agree too. Right. And Israel has stolen land. Can we all agree they stole the Golan Heights?
Yes.
All right, and now the Golan Heights is part of Israel in defiance of the UN. Right. So maybe it's adverse possession, like you described, but it seems pretty clear to me who owns the Golan Heights now.
Well, sure.
Right.
Well, they also say possession is 9/10 of the law, right?
Exactly. And can I make one more point? You had said the chosen people of God resonates with you as part of this, like, sort of, I think part of this political analysis. And my point is that, like, I don't see how these spiritual metaphysical concepts like the chosen people of God really play into a rational political legal analysis of the outcome of a war. I just
It's right. It doesn't totally. Okay.
For example, I have said, and I'm going to put this as nicely as I can, that as far as I can see, the philosophy of Zionism is the idea that the Old Testament of the Bible is a deed from God to the Jews over the land of Israel. Okay?
Fair enough, yeah.
I don't agree with that. Okay, I believe in God, and I read the Old Testament and everything else, and I have a great deal of respect for it. But the idea that the Old Testament is some kind of legal document that can be enforced in real time against real people in 2024, I mean, that's just absurd to me.
Well, what's more real, enforcement by people or enforcement by God? Maybe they feel like it's enforcement by God, and God.
I mean, perhaps that is how they feel, but that seems very self-serving.
Yeah, of course. Well, so I would just say that, I understand. And one really isn't so tied to the other, except in this sense. There was that movie Munich that Steven Spielberg directed.
I've seen it. Yes.
Do you remember that line where after they bombed that Palestinian poet's home and they kill his little daughter, she ends up picking up the phone, and the two main characters or two of the main characters are talking to each other, and one is saying, yeah, but we're Jews, we're supposed to be righteous,
Yeah.
it is, I think, ingrained in that people. I think so it's hard to separate the religious from the political. Even to somebody who's non-religious like myself, I can see the connection there, the cultural connection.
Right. But in terms of adverse possession, the Jews had been dispossessed of the land of Israel since Pompey destroyed the Second Temple, I think in 70 AD or 60 AD, a long, 2,000 years ago, give or take. Sure. I mean, if 2,000 years isn't enough for adverse possession, what the heck is?
Yeah, well, you're right. So again, if we're relying on Western jurisprudence.
Well, but we're talking about property rights. So we're not talking about theology, or maybe we are.
On the issue,
or is there a difference between theology and property rights?
Where's the question?
So the theology, what it does is it definitely creates in the individual a connection with the land, right? Like if you believe that God gave you the land, that your or gave it to your forefathers,
a connection in the individual to a land that was held by my 2,000 years ago forefathers. Yeah, that seems tenuous to me, man.
As an Armenian, even though I don't think that the Armenians should be trying to reclaim their old lands, but it totally resonates with me on an emotional level.
Two millennia. After 2 millennia, it still resonates.
Of course, because it's been culturally passed down. It's like it's something that every Armenian I know feels very, very strongly about, like almost viscerally, because our land was taken from us, and we go all the way back to the 1st century. This is where our forefathers came from. It was taken from us by force. Okay, and so practically speaking, I can say no. I think it's wrong for us to try to take it back. There's people there, right? But note something. I came here in '91 as a refugee. We were born and raised in Baku, Azerbaijan, which was a neighboring republic. At the time, it was all part of the Soviet Union, but now it's a separate country. So my family, my ancestors in the 20th century, after they fled the Turks, they all established themselves in Azerbaijan. And so in the late 80s, in 88, when the pogroms and the tensions started happening upon the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Azerbaijanis were able to kick the Armenians out. So technically, I was expelled from my ancestral lands twice. Not just my original ancestral lands, but also my adopted home. And we lost everything. We left everything there.
Which became the enemy of your ancestral lands. And is currently at war with your ancestral lands.
Yeah, and of course, that tension goes way back. It's not like it just materialized in the 80s.
No, I know.
During the Soviet times, though, it was wonderful. It was an international city. Everybody got along, I still think, like, it's amazing how much similarity there is between the cultures, but a lot of Armenians don't like hearing about that, and I'm sure a lot of Azerbaijanis don't like hearing about it either.
Right.
But
I mean, what if there was a case study of maybe people who speak English and maybe a clearly delineated country of sorts that got divided, and maybe the people sat for 1,000 years and still wanted it back. Could there be such a case study? A clearly delineated place, maybe an island of some kind, where you're clearly like one island, one people, right? And then that island of English speakers, right, has part of it not in the whole country. Obviously, I'm talking about Ireland, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the biggest supporter of Palestinians in Europe, Ireland, right?
Sure.
The one country that could clearly understand what it's like.
I mean, you can make that same argument about France right now with the demographic change because of the refugees, and also possibly Germany.
Well, the case study I was using with Ireland is we have English speakers. We can go
Sure.
back hundreds of years and look exactly like they're. I mean, it still hasn't eased, right? There's still a lot of these
Right.
people that are like, that was my great-great-grandfather's land. I want it back.
Right.
So that being the case, right, let's go back to Palestine, right? Or like I was saying before, if there wasn't the Trail of Tears, these natives would still be here saying, give us our stuff back. They would absolutely be saying that because that is human nature.
They are still here.
Well, they're in Oklahoma. They're not actually in Florida.
It doesn't matter.
Well, what
They're
I'm
still
saying
in
is
America.
There's some here.
What I'm saying is it would be a lot easier if these Palestinians weren't in Palestine bitching to get their land back. And I think the Israelis know that. And I think if the three of us were Israelis, we would understand that that's the most pragmatic thing to do, right? Is to ensure they are not near this land to have a claim to want it back. The problem with Ireland is they're right there. They're right there. They're literally looking at it going, man, this isn't one island, one people, right? They clearly can look at a made-up line saying this island is one island, one people. But I mean, the situation, once you get the Palestinians removed and they're not visually looking at the land, their claim becomes a lot less, right? Similarly to the Indians in Oklahoma now.
I mean,
they
isn't
can make
that-
a claim here.
Well, they've been pacified. This is the thing. You're saying their claim becomes less. The reason that you don't have Cherokees clamoring to get their land in Florida back is probably because they've received a lot of benefits from the government. And why is the government giving them the benefits? You said earlier something about how nobody asked the victor to explain themselves.
I said that.
Okay, well, why is it that the victor is so intent on manufacturing propaganda to cover up the problematic aspects of its prior campaigns?
It wasn't nobody asked the victor to explain themselves. It's that nobody will ask the victor if he was right. And do you know who that's a quote from? And I'm probably about to go down in flames forever. But you know who said that originally, as far as I know?
Hitler.
That is
It
correct.
was
That
really?
is correct.
That's funny. But to that point, why is it that the victor always feels the need to propagandize and present itself in a much different light?
Because that's how you express power. You have to control the narrative. That's what power is power is the power to say what is real and what is not, and that is the power to control the narrative.
But think about the converse of that. That also reflects a state of powerlessness, because now in order to cover up your past crimes, you're having to lie, engage in deception. And yes, sure, you have the power to do it, but the fact that you have to do it subjugates yourself to the people to whom you're propagandizing. Am I wrong about that?
You're not wrong about that, but you're missing the bigger point, which is that anyone who is the victor in any military sense, in any kind of military conflict, is going to have to, of course, have horrible things that have to be minimized to preserve the gravitas of the government that comes into existence once the victory is achieved.
That's because you can't do it on your own merits. And
But that's because you can't win military victories in a what do you want to call it, malicious way. You can't win a military victory by being the nice guy. You win military victories by being a bloody psychopath and destroying. And that's every military victory. That's what's within that's sort of within the nature of the will to power.
Yeah, but again, so. But you said, you conceded that I'm not wrong, right? So
no, you're not wrong.
I agree with you. I agree with your overall analysis and the pragmatic aspect of it. But what I'm saying is there's clearly an element of powerlessness. There's clearly an element of patheticness in having to cover up your past crimes. An element of sniveling that is not characteristic of the
It's not
victor.
so much sniveling as hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is impossible to escape in the arena of politics. You can't.
Agreed,
You
yeah.
cannot operate in the arena of politics without being a hypocrite. It's impossible. Because you can't win a bloody military victory and then claim moral superiority at the same time, because that's impossible.
But what I'm saying is then your power is not your victory is not absolute. Your power is
No
not
victory
absolute.
is there's nothing absolute in the world of phenomena,
Then
Boris.
why even talk about victors and losers?
Well,
right?
because there's close approximations.
it's not good enough. In my
Well,
opinion.
you know, if you demand 100% at all times, the only place you're going to be satisfied is in Plato's world of the forms.
What I'm saying is this: we shouldn't say, like the quote from. Granted, you know, I know you're not. You don't
I'm
endorse-
so sorry to have even used that quote now that I've had to admit that it was Hitler that I'm quoting.
All right.
But it's true, and I'm not praising Hitler. I'm just saying it's a statement of fact, and I think it's more or less, if you look at the historical record, it's correct.
Okay, let me.
I think that there's moral righteousness. I think that if you prevail and you're a victor and you're morally righteous, you don't have a problem. I think if you prevail by cheating, by lying, you degrade yourself. You're not really truly a victor, and eventually, maybe not immediately, but it'll unravel.
But aren't
itself.
cheating and lying necessary in a wartime situation?
Once you've declared war, you've declared that morality no longer plays
Right,
a
you can
role in
cheat
the
and
decision
lie.
in the decisions that you make with respect to your policy towards the people who you're at war with. Though,
So
I mean that's what the declaration of war means. It means we're no longer going to recognize any morality towards you. We're going to use kinetic energy to destroy you until you do what we say. That the declaration of war is a declaration that morality is no longer on the table.
What about the notion of just war? That there's a right way to conduct war and there's a wrong way to conduct war, and the right way to conduct war allows reason and justice to prevail, and the wrong way to conduct war creates, opportunities
I think that's
for tyranny.
utter sophistry.
So the idea that there are rules
there's
for
no
war
just
making.
war. There is no such thing. War is unjust per se.
Okay, if we take
Which is why I oppose war, by the way.
That's
as
fair.
a general principle.
That's good. But let me ask you, does that then translate to like individual relationships? So for example, you attack me, right? And in self-defense, I retaliate.
Mm-hmm.
To me, under those circumstances, I would characterize your action as unjust because you're initiating force against me, and my action as necessarily just, even if it results in harm to you because I'm defending myself.
So then it becomes.
But
who's
you
the
understand
aggressor?
when you're
Correct.
when you're in a context of war, you have declared that just and unjust is irrelevant because just and unjust is a question of morality. And as we've just all, I think, agreed, once you declare war, what you're really saying is morality no longer plays a role in my relationship to the party that I'm at war with.
Right, but you're saying that. Okay, but look, let me just unpack this a little bit, right? I see what you're saying in a way, okay? In a way. But that's not the way that's not the way, like, as a child, for example, you thought about war. You didn't think about war like that. You thought about war like we sometimes have to fight wars because somebody goes nuts and does the wrong thing. Hitler did the wrong thing. We did the right thing. So you never talk about World War II, for example, and the role that America played as unjust. We have been conditioned, and maybe that conditioning is misplaced, but it was important to us growing up, and still is to some of us, that no, in fact, the reason that we were on the right side of history there is because we were waging a just war and Hitler was waging an unjust war.
Well, let's not forget about Japan's role in World War II. I mean, America came into World War II as a result of the Pearl Harbor attack, which is presented to all of those who live in America and the Western Europe as having begun after a surprise attack that America had absolutely nothing to do with and no idea about.
Very one-dimensional.
There's no idea about it at all. We didn't know where the Japanese Navy was. We completely lost the entire fleet.
Did not see them at all, even though our two biggest battleships weren't in the harbor.
Americans, as far as I know, at least, certainly myself and anyone that I've been around, is taught that we got into World War II justly because we were surprise attacked by Japan at Pearl Harbor. And that is the narrative. That's the official government narrative. That's the I pledge allegiance to a flag narrative. But the reality is there's absolutely no way that the United States Naval Intelligence and the CIA and all the other various people whose business it is to know these things didn't know that the Japanese fleet was on the sail towards Pearl Harbor with a battle group, and that we had been blockading their ports in Indonesia and in New Guinea and in various other important oil-producing places in the Pacific, and we had basically given them no choice but to either attack or capitulate. One or the other. and Japan attacked. The idea that that's a surprise attack, that the naval intelligence units and the OSS and the there was no CIA at that point. It was the OSS. But regardless, the idea that they didn't know where the entire Japanese Navy was the morning of Pearl Harbor, that it was on the coast of Hawaii, that is highly doubtful, if not utterly absurd.
So my response to that would be twofold. That one, that by itself does not mean that we were not engaged in a just war. Okay. Well, and two, the second component there
it certainly means that it certainly lessens the argument that we were attacked without warning. They hated our freedom, and then we went to war with them. Kind of argument.
But looking back at history, right, knowing what the Germans and the Japanese were doing and what they had intended to do, and also considering not necessarily what the leaders knew or what some criminal element in our government knew, let's say, but what the people felt. And why the people felt we were justified, and why people feel now we were justified in involving ourselves in that war. People have a very strong feeling that war ought to be just,
right? Which is why we have the surprise. The surprise attack narrative.
Right, or
that's why the surprise attack narrative has been emphasized, and any other narrative has been treated as a conspiracy theory.
Right, but this goes to my other point about victors having to cover up their crimes as though they didn't really win, because maybe we did not conduct a just war. I don't know, or maybe we failed. We had some failings in certain respects. Okay,
well, I'm saying you guys keep talking about the just war of World War II, but let's not forget the narrative that built this country, the just war of the revolution, right? The king was willing to accept the Albany Plan, right? You think he wanted to go kill fellow English speakers? You think he really wanted to go? You think the average Englishman wanted to go kill their cousin here in America? No, the king was willing to accept the Albany Plan. This is like a known fact. It's a known fact that the Americans deviated from the plan to force a war. Right? And then what do? We elevate to godlike status these businessmen who didn't want to pay taxes, right? We elevate them to this godlike status. They absolutely had this just war. The revolution absolutely had to happen, right? I mean, that's another one, too. That's another one that definitely, So
you think they should have accepted taxation without representation?
I mean, was that really the case? The Albany Plan would have allowed for representation in Parliament, right? Ben Franklin presented himself, and the king goes back and he says, you know what? Fine, I'll do this. But at that point, the colonists are like, too late, bro. Right? And then they win, right? Let's assume they lost. I mean, you really think, I don't know. I'm just saying there's
they fought for their independence against a tyranny, an ocean away.
You use this word tyranny. I mean, again, and again, I'm a big believer in our country. I truly, truly believe it. The Intolerable Act, the Stamp Act, I get it. I get what the colonists were doing. I totally, totally get it. But could it also not be that this is just the history they taught us? That they taught us that we had no choice, there was no other way, that the British that had defended the Americans against the French and the Indian just 10 years prior, that they somehow just were absolutely our enemy?
I think the more likely explanation is that war can neither be categorized as unjust or just categorically because of the nature of war.
I agree with that assessment.
Okay, couple things here. So first of all, where does morality kick in, right? So if we're talking about just war and we're talking about collective action, I don't really know where morality kicks in. But if we boil it down to two individuals, right? When if you and I were in a fist fight,
right,
like out of hatred towards each other,
right,
would you then say, well, there's no such thing as a just fight? Would you say the same thing about a conflict between individuals as you would about a conflict between nations?
No, I think there is a fair fight between individuals.
Okay, so
I think there is.
So
I mean, even in a situation of hatred, even in a battle to the death, I think that it can be done with honor. In a way that is dignified and honorable to both to the winner and to the slain and to the victor.
But that could not be done when you're speaking of collectives.
No, and the reason why is because morality and ethics and all of those concepts which we have debated on the show consistently, they really, for me, they really only have any real meaning between individual human beings. I don't really think those concepts have any real, I mean, maybe like anecdotal relevance, but they don't have any real relevance to the relationship between nation states, in my opinion.
I actually agree with
Yeah,
that.
I
100%.
100% agree with that too. That it's on a micro level. That on the macro level, that's nearly non-existent.
It's just there's no collective that can be a moral agent, in my opinion. All decision making is ultimately on the individual.
I want to circle back to what you were just saying about a fair fight, or like the idea of let's take, for example, in the animal world, right? To whatever, fighting over a mate.
Right.
To bear, lion, whatever.
Hippopotamus, whatever. Hippopotamus.
Right. Whatever it is. I mean, so like, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know every animal, but for the most part, it's not like a fight to the death, right? It's at one point, the one male subjects to,
Usually one of the males submits, but sometimes a fight to the death.
Okay, but more often than not, it's just a submit. Like the one animal isn't looking to kill his fellow animal, right? He's just looking to get him to submit
to secure his mate,
right? And the one lion runs right. I mean, and this, could we call this a fair fight, or I guess a natural fight, or a fight, or like a fight between individuals, a conflict between individuals that is perfectly natural? I mean, I know they're not human.
I think it's yes.
Well, for animals, sure. I mean, for man, it's a little different.
Okay,
right?
so for men, then you don't think there was ever a point in evolutionary stage where two men were physically fighting over a mate?
We still do that.
Absolutely, we still do that to this very day.
Okay, and so is that a fair fight between two men?
Well, again, if you can you say that it's a fair fight between two tigers? Fairness? Do these rules apply to animals? Because it doesn't seem like they would.
I guess a just fight, a good fight. I guess.
But for the same reason it wouldn't apply to the collective, how could it apply to non-rational actors who can't possibly engage in moral decision making?
Right.
Only human beings are capable of doing that, and only individual ones at that.
But I mean, there is pre-programming propensity amongst the animals, including humans, to fight one another.
Yes.
Right. So that is kind of the natural course of things.
Well, no question.
Who's to say that that it's natural for human beings to fight each other?
I
Yes.
agree
with that. I'm sure it is.
Why do you think that's natural? That it's natural?
Like we just agreed to.
Have you never gotten in a fight, Boris? You never been in a fist fight?
I've been jumped
been
before.
In many.
I don't think it's natural, though. I think it's an aberration.
I disagree. I think it's utterly natural. When I was in like 6th grade, I got in a fight like 3 days a week for almost the entire year.
Yeah, no, I haven't been in that many fights.
I could also see you like.
I'm from Palaca.
I could also see you being smart alecky and not backing down.
Well,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm from Palaca, and I do have kind of like a strong death drive. So I got in a lot of fights.
You're a little cantankerous.
Right. I can see you being quick
not always,
pissing somebody off and just being like.
I have a tendency to shoot my mouth off. That is true.
So, yeah, but I don't know, man. Like, it doesn't come natural to me. I can tell you, I have never been able to hit a person in the face. I have a real problem with it.
Right, but I mean, if somebody attacked your wife, or somebody attacked Adam, or somebody attacked your kid, I guarantee you would attack your kid. Yeah, you would punch that person in the face in a heartbeat.
But that's a different question. Am I willing to punch somebody in the face to protect my wife? Yes. Am I gonna like it? No.
That's why I do. If you liked it, we asked you if you did it.
Right,
that's a different question.
Right. That was the question to me. But the reason that issue came up is because you're claiming that violence is natural to man, and I'm saying no, it's not. If I have to punch someone in the face, I will, but I'm genuinely squeamish about it.
Cite to one fact in the historical record that supports your argument that violence is not natural to man, please.
Well, I think you're the one making an affirmative statement that it is. I think you have to prove it. And I'm giving you an exception.
Okay, here's my proof. The entire written historical record of mankind
reflects what?
A propensity for men to do violence against each other.
It's all a history of battles.
Where? I don't know. How about I know those religious wars that you railed against in the last episode?
How about everybody in between that just does wonderful things, living their lives, making art, making pottery? That's really where mankind...
People can make art and make pottery and do wonderful things for each other and still engage in violence all the time.
But they don't have to.
It's a violent world.
It's not the natural thing.
No, we are driven towards violence, man. This is a violent world, bro. Yeah, I mean, Darwin is still relevant, man. We fight to everyone, to you.
No, Darwin. In what sense is Darwin relevant
in the
to
sense
this situation?
that we are always in competition. Every living thing is in competition with every other living thing for existence. And you know how you exist as a living thing? By killing some other living thing and consuming it. That is a fact. Right. That is inescapable. So, we cannot survive without doing violence to some other living thing. That is natural. That is normal.
And can we apply that to nation states? Can we apply that same individual?
I don't know.
Okay. So first I would say that the fact that we do violence doesn't mean that it is in our nature to do violence to each other. The fact that we do violence to animals as a practical matter. We were talking about this a little bit during the break. Because Conrad was saying, well, look, if we were talking about the farming situation.
Right, we were talking about a vegan going to a family farm versus like one of those chicken farms where they're not seeing light, and it's like really, really terrible. But is it the same? Is it not the same action that you're taking the life of one of these farm animals? Right.
Look,
and so my answer was,
go ahead.
Yeah, but my answer to that was no, it's not the same thing. And I think most family farmers, and I know this because we have chickens, for example, and the way we regard our animals, it's not that we won't kill them. Mm-hmm. It's not that won't happen, but we don't view that as an act of like a negative act or an unnatural act against the animal. We took care of it, has a purpose in relation to us, and once it's old enough, it pays that back. It's a relationship.
Mm-hmm. And the chicken feels the same way, right?
It doesn't. The chicken is not a human. It's not a rational being.
But what I'm saying is that, like, you said, why is it in our nature to do violence? I'm saying to survive, literally to continue as a sentient species, as a biological species, that species has to kill. It has to kill something, no matter what.
I understand.
Okay,
that.
Whether it's a carrot I take out of the ground, I'm still taking life to eat this carrot. I'm taking the carrot's life and I'm eating it.
We'd rather be on that end of the equation.
We're not talking about killing animals and
violence
plants.
is inherent into the life process. Is my argument.
Okay. I feel like I can concede that point without conceding the point that violence between men is natural. I can concede that violence as against the world because, and I totally agree with that. I believe it's man against his environment, and his environment does not include other men. It is all of us against nature itself. Nature includes animals, it includes hurricanes, it does not include each other. And that man is more naturally disposed to cooperation with each other, and it's a mistake to treat each other as though you're members of the environment and not members of the protagonist species.
It may be a mistake for men to be violent towards each other, but it's utterly and completely and totally natural, in my opinion.
Okay, so can you demonstrate that?
Yes, I can.
All you've demonstrated thus far is it's natural for us to kill animals. It's natural for us to kill to survive, certain things. You have not demonstrated.
Give me a citation to a single culture, a human civilization that has existed in the historical record that didn't exist on the basis of violence.
It's a very difficult question.
There's...
Well, no, because
is there even one example of this, sir?
Well, because that's how social order is created. Like we gave the example of the animals.
Social order is based on violence,
right?
Or the potential for violence.
Right.
That's all there is to it. That's a fact.
Right.
Man.
Both animals,
whether you like it or not, that is a objective fact. Man.
I'm not following. So what was the question was?
Is there any human culture or civilization known that has existed in the entirety of the human race that hasn't existed on the basis of violence, that hasn't preserved its existence on the basis of violence, that hasn't secured its existence on the basis of violence?
Because violence trumps reason. You can't expect people to just do things out of reason. They have to be forced. People need to be forced to do things.
Right? Violence is inescapable, man. The idea that it's not natural or not some part of the human condition, I think is, with all apologies, and I love you, Boris, but I think it's naive.
I 100% agree with
I can only speak for what I feel. Mm-hmm. I cannot punch a person in the face. I am squeamish about it.
I guarantee you.
Is that because there's some kind of psychological defect in me that is unnatural to the rest of mankind, where I'm just so squeamish and pathetic, and you guys are just so capable, and it comes so naturally to you? Is this your experience? I'm just trying to understand this. Where are we coming from? If we're talking about our own personal experience, do you feel inclined towards violence somehow?
No, I don't. But I sense very much you and Boris what I sense in me, and that if the three of us were out somewhere and someone punched Adam, I guarantee you wouldn't hesitate to shove that guy.
Of course, retaliatory force is not only But that's not
But
the
you
same
wouldn't,
thing.
you wouldn't feel squeamish about it in the instant. I guarantee you.
I would still feel squeamish about punching a person in the face, but I may feel an obligation to do it.
But I'm saying you would quickly get over it, and you would act accordingly.
But the
right?
question is, does violence against other men come naturally to us? That's the question.
And I would say it does, because you would act naturally to defend your friend Adam from some.
I would act rationally. I would say my friend Adam is. I would do the Venn diagram, the one that Adam hates, because apparently I do it during sex too. He actually asked me. He's like, "How did you decide to marry your wife?" I'm like, "Oh, we did the Venn diagram."
I was like, did you get the Venn diagram out or what?
That's hilarious.
But no, I do strongly feel that way. Like, I think that if somebody were harming Adam, I would engage in that analysis.
Right,
I would determine whether it was right.
In the flash of a second.
But you don't have time
The
for that
squeamishness
analysis.
wouldn't go away.
In the heat of battle, you don't have time for an analysis. You react.
Right,
You react
I'm
on a
saying-
physical level, on an emotional
Right,
level,
and
on a
God made
spiritual
you with
level.
a natural,
to protect, not to harm.
Well, to protect me, you have to harm someone else, man. It's still violence.
But that's
Don't you
tangential.
understand? Do you not understand? To protect one, you have to harm another. That is the nature. That is the yin and
Right,
yang.
and it is the nature.
That
It would
is
kick
the
into
that
you
is the
immediately.
Tao of everything.
It would definitely kick in
Okay,
immediately.
You know,
does
to
it-
live, we have to kill. To live as humans, we have to kill. Literally, whether it's cows
Right.
or people
Boris,
or carrots,
I
it
know
doesn't
you-
matter.
Boris, I know you, man.
We
Even if
cannot
there's-
live
yeah.
without killing. That is a fact. That's ontological fact. That's objective, brother.
But this is fascinating to me, right? Because it doesn't sound like we're making any distinction between the initiation of force and retaliation. We're saying it's all violence and it's all equal. But let me ask you, and you're saying we have to do it. If you could live a
what
life,
happens if we stop doing it? We starve to death.
But if you could live a life,
Social order breaks down completely.
well, hold on. Well, why would we starve to death?
Because we wouldn't have
one's doing
anything to
anything.
eat.
Yeah, no
You
one's
eat
doing-
animals.
no
You kill
one's doing-
animals.
Well, but that's violence. That's killing another life.
thought I did-
That's taking another life.
I thought I distinguished though. Like I'm saying, violence of man towards man is not natural.
No, I mean,
I'm not saying that
But you're,
violence
but
is
you're saying
natural.
in defense of another of a loved one, it is natural.
No, because
Right.
I'm distinguishing between the initiation of force and retaliatory force. Retaliatory force to me
Is
a
natural.
rational exercise, not a natural one. It's a rational exercise. I would not jump in and start punching someone's face because I'm naturally
Yeah, I guarantee you would if like someone was hitting your child or something. You wouldn't even
Of
like
course.
it wouldn't even.
But it would be part of the calculation there. That's what would justify it.
If
I would not
if
do
someone
it.
started verbally attacking your child and saying all kinds of utterly disgusting, vile,
Yeah, I'm not punching
repugnant
anybody
things.
over words. I don't
Really, if someone
but
came
the
at
moment
your
they
daughter
push-
and
the moment they push,
and
you
got
take
in
your
her
teeth.
face and started calling her a whore, you wouldn't punch them? Because I certainly would. I would do it if they did it to your daughter, much less mine. If they did it to mine, I'd fucking blow myself up and
Right,
kill
at
them
that
all.
point, they're asking for it.
Okay,
right?
but I think that's just you being emotional about the situation. And if you just took 2 seconds to think about it, you would probably be like, all right, let me pull back a little bit.
No, I don't
Alright, so
think
are-
so.
are
I don't
you
think
saying-
so.
let me
If
just-
somebody came at my daughter like that, I would probably kill
Can we
them.
all agree that in defense of a loved one, a natural reaction would kick in to help them?
Yes.
No, because even there, I don't view it as a natural.
Okay, fair.
Of course, I'm going to emotionally be connected with my daughter and her pain in that circumstance.
And then a natural reaction
of
would
course,
kick in to stop that, right? To stop whatever, someone
but
kicking
what is
her
that
or, like-
action? Here's the point I'm trying to make. That action that I would take to protect my daughter is not is not the violent bit of that is not natural to me. And here's why I would say that. Because if no one had initiated force against my daughter, I would never engage in violence. If no one initiated force against me ever, no other
What about
man,
the threat of
I would
force?
that's all part and parcel, right?
So that is
So
force?
course,
so
the threat of
so
force
somebody
can
could
be an
could
initiation
walk
of
up
force, of
to your
course. It's
daughter
common
in
sense.
some strange situation, some person that you had no idea to, and could start calling her a whore and a slut to her face, right up in her face, and you wouldn't punch them.
Well, I mean, I know you're describing like I guess if they're like in her face, and I could say
I'm talking about literally you're at a restaurant and some
and
stranger
you're like-
walks up to your daughter and gets right up within a foot of her face and starts calling her a whore.
Yeah.
You wouldn't punch that person.
I would
stake my
hope
life-
I wouldn't.
Well,
I
I
would
would.
stake- yeah, I would stake
I
my
might
life you
shoot
would,
them,
Boris.
but I would certainly punch them.
I understand, but that again, like I get that, but Adam, if nobody ever did that to your daughter, if nobody ever transgressed against you in this way, if nobody attacked you, you wouldn't be going out there attacking people.
Of course I wouldn't, but that doesn't mean that violence isn't in my nature, man. It just means that I have control over my behavior.
But it does mean that it doesn't come naturally to you. That is not the initial impulse. The impulse.
The fact that it's not initial doesn't make it unnatural.
But even the notion of protecting your daughter, the reaction there, it's not to engage in violence. It's to protect the child.
But we have to do that with violence, and that is inescapable.
That's tangential.
No, it's
Whereas
inescapable.
the
It's
initiation
inescapable.
of force, the violence comes first. The intent is to engage in violence, and then. Okay, so
violence is natural, in my opinion. I'm not going to shift from that.
Well, I think I agree with Adam, and I think the reason it is natural is because we all know human beings, right? We've all been kids on the playground. There comes a point where the guy isn't going to stop talking until you punch him in the mouth, right? And everyone has to learn this lesson.
Somebody's going to have to get their ass kicked. Maybe it's me, maybe it's him, but it's going to have to happen. It's going to have to happen.
Right, it's a lesson we all learned growing up, and I would go so far as to say it's a rightfully so kind of lesson.
Right.
Because
I think it's a very important lesson.
Right. I agree. I think it's definitely.
I don't think it demonstrates that violence comes natural to us. I think all it demonstrates is that we're capable of violence, that we can retaliate with violence if we choose to. But in order for you guys to demonstrate that violence comes natural to us, you would have to demonstrate that everybody's inclined to initiate force for convenience sake. And I don't think that most of us are.
It's convenience, you think?
I think cooperation.
We have to be violent to survive in this world. This is a violent world. We live in a violent world. We live in a world where, like, fundamentally, when you remove all of the human Byzantine structures and laws and norms and etc., we live in a world where every sentient being is at war with every other sentient being. Every sentient being has to try to destroy and consume some other sentient being simply to survive. That means violence is at the most fundamental nature part of our existence.
I think the world is what we make it. And I think that if we concede that point and we say whatever dark gods reign over us, that they can have their pound of flesh and that we will submit and call ourselves violent and call ourselves decrepit and call ourselves wretched, which is what, frankly, a lot of those religions want us to do.
I believe we have the yin and the yang, man. We have the violence and we have the justice, and within us both, and they're both equally powerful, but they're both inescapable.
Well, violence.
Let me go back to the natural world in the sense that we can agree that all parents have the natural inclination to protect their children in the animal world, yes. Right? We see this. Anybody guarding eggs, anybody, whatever it might be, right? So we can agree then that in the natural world we see a propensity of violence, right? A natural need to engage in violence, and we would agree that human beings aren't outside of this. That they too have a natural inclination to protect their kids, and that in protecting their children, violence would be a natural inclination. Right, Boris?
I agree.
I'm hoping if we phrase it that way, right? Because like I said, I know you, man. I would stake my life that if someone was saying shit to your kid, you wouldn't hesitate to pop them in the face.
But again, this is the part that I'm struggling with. Maybe I'm too adamant that it's not natural. Maybe we're getting bogged down in this naturalness aspect of it. But there is a difference between engaging in violence through initiation and engaging in violence due to necessity. There is clearly, to me, a difference between the two. And it seems to me that man is naturally inclined to do the latter, but I do not have any evidence that man is inclined to do the former, except damaged men, psychopaths, etc.
What about the Latin phrase, homo hominis lupus est? Man is wolf to man, right? Man's biggest fear.
I think that's a very pessimistic view of man that doesn't quite appreciate the nature of man.
So you think men are more cooperative naturally than competitive?
I think of course I think we're naturally inclined to cooperate initially.
I think we're 100% man and 100% animal at the same time, and we have to respect both halves of our nature.
I think there's something to that. All right, Conrad. Go ahead and we'll give you the last word, I think.
No, this has been fun. I definitely want to do this again. I definitely want to have a moon landing talk.
Okay.
I definitely think...
perhaps to be continued then.
Well, let's give Conrad his last. He gets the final say.
Well, I guess I appreciate
maybe
that,
summarize
guys.
everything for it. Maybe kind of.
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of all over the place today. Certainly a lot of fun. I think what I'd like to end on is I think we can all agree that it would be unnatural if somebody just allowed shit to be taken, just allowed themselves to be taking shit, right? We would all definitely question, man, why is that happening, right? Why is this just being allowed? So by that same token, I would go so far as to say that physically having to stand ground is a necessity.
I agree 100%. In fact, I would say so. I would go so far as to say that if you do not retaliate when it's just, that you are in fact asserting that violence is the way.
Right, and this is, and I know I don't want to extend this longer. Going back to the Palestinians, then it is very, very evident that they are not going to stop trying to get their land back, their parents' land back, their grandparents' land back. Right, we can all agree this is very natural. Most human beings are like, yeah, I agree with these people constantly trying to do that. That being said, if the three of us were Israelis, we wouldn't be blind to this. We would definitely be like, man, that's definitely what's going to happen. Being the case that that's definitely what's going to happen, right? We can, situation 1, forcibly remove these people. Situation 2, exterminate them all. Or situation 3, allow shit to continue as it's been for a while.
Or situation 4, make a deal.
Yeah, but situation 4 seems, I mean, you're a gambling man too, Adam. There's, like, I mean, how would you handicap that? Like 1,000 to 1?
So
I'm a big believer in the art of the deal, man.
There you go. I was going to say that, right? In November, you're going to have a chance to elect somebody who makes the deal kind of their priority.
He wrote a book about it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, that's
Well, I don't know that he necessarily wrote it. I'm pretty sure he had a ghostwriter.
All right, gentlemen. To be continued.
To be continued.
All right.
All right, I'm the Cyber Divine, goddammit.
What you're after, nuisance factor.